And thank you for coming. We appreciate you all coming to the fire department this evening for a fun downtown parking meeting. We're gonna go ahead and respect your guys' time, so we're gonna jump into our presentation here, promised at 6 p.m. But we're gonna be here for a while this evening, so feel free to get up and walk around afterwards and ask us any questions you have. My name is David Eisenbrown. I'm a senior planner with the town of Windsor, and I'm the project manager of the parking study. Tonight with us here, we have both the town manager, some community development staff, as well as a few elected officials, and we're all happy to answer any questions you have. Again, this is the downtown parking study meeting, but we do know there's some other questions going on and kind of been floating around. So we do have additional information both from the town and DDA on the back wall on the tables there for additional information. Or again, we're happy to answer any questions that you all have this evening. With that, we've got Paul with Mead and Hunt, and we're going to be walking through the presentation. Please feel free to ask any questions you guys have throughout it. This is meant to be kind of a nice informal discussion that we're having this evening. Again, we're here to present to you some of our draft findings that we've had over the last couple of years since this study originated back in 2020. Obviously, it's kind of started and stopped with the whole COVID issue, but we're kind of full back swing here and kind of hopefully wrapping up here in the next couple of months. So with that, Paul, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, David. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. I'm Paul. I'm with Mead and Hunt. I have a couple other coworkers here tonight. We have stickies on, and like David said afterwards, we're happy to meet you at some of the posters around the room, answer more questions. And if anybody can't hear me at any time, way in the back, just let me know. So tonight we're going to talk about the future parking needs and the initial recommendations from the downtown parking study. And like David said, we started almost 2 years ago, paused for a while, and then came back in the past 6 months. And we'll tell you about some of the other engagement efforts and the parking committee we've been working with throughout this process. So next slide. So what we're going to talk about tonight is sort of what's the existing parking supply and the existing parking demand. And we're going to talk a little bit about future land use. And, I guess just to clarify a little bit more on what David said, this is not a land use study. We recognize that there are some possible land use changes that may be of concern. We're really neutral on land use. We're not here to recommend what's good land use or not. We're here to develop a menu of parking management and operation strategies that the town can use and the community can use in the coming years to better deal with the challenges of parking that are related to some of the land use. So we're really neutral on the land use. We understand it's a big concern. And like David said, there's other community development folks here to take those questions, but we're really all about parking tonight. Then we'll talk about the projected future demand, and then we'll tell you a little bit about how much more parking you'll need. And then we'll talk about capacity recommendations, where you need more parking and what type of parking, and then some management strategies, because you've got to both build a little bit more parking and then manage the parking that you have and will have a little bit better. And then what's our implementation plan for that? What is the next steps to complete this study and actually make the recommendations move forward? So what are we looking for from everybody that's here tonight? We really want to know what you think about the future parking demand. Do you have any questions? Do you disagree? Do you think it's too low? Do you think it's too high? What about the parking recommendations we're making? Where the parking is going? How much parking is going? What do you think about that and management strategies? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? And then, what do you think would be the best type of parking solution to downtown? So again, we're going to show you a menu of stuff, and it's not all going to be implemented or all implemented in the same place. So this is really a time to comment on what are the best strategies and locations that the town should use moving forward. And in terms of how to comment, so you can tell us directly. We have comment cards in the back. And like Kimberly said, there is a web page for this project on the town's website, and you can send your comments through the website tonight, after tonight, for the next few weeks, and we'll continue to catalog all of those and take them under consideration. So there's lots of ways to comment, and we definitely want to hear from you. You guys live here, you know the town the best. Next slide. So the study area boundaries. So the town actually did, or the Development Authority actually did a parking study almost 10 years ago. And that study had a pretty narrow focus in that shaded red area. It was really literally Main Street and maybe a block or half a block to the north or south. So when the town first started thinking about doing a new parking study, a lot has changed in 10 years, and even a lot has changed in 2 years. And we started the study, so we went further out. We went all the way up to Boardwalk and the lakefront, and we went south of Walnut Street, about halfway to Elm. And so we really felt that we wanted to have a parking study area that would include not just the commercial uses along Main Street, but also, some of the events and activities that happen, in Main Park or in the Boardwalk or lakefront, and capture all of those needs as well as along Main Street. Next slide. So what is really the purpose? Why are we doing this study? Why are we doing it now? We really want to engage the community, business owners, residents. We had a parking committee that people volunteered for, gave up many hours of their time to participate so we could understand how they see the needs. And we really want to develop a 2 and 5 and 10-year plan for parking management so that the town can program these into their budget or work with, new businesses or other developers that come in. And then, we want to make sure that these things are timed right and they increase accessibility, making it easier to get to the businesses and the reasons that people come downtown, and decrease congestion. We don't want people circling the block to look for parking and create even more traffic than you already have. And we also looked at some of the best practices, both here in the Front Range, from some other nearby towns that have struggled with these same parking challenges, and well beyond. Meehan Hunt has done parking studies from the East Coast all the way to the Front Range to bring definitely a lot of different perspective. And then really to support multimodal and complete streets. So the town has lots of other initiatives to make it easier and safer to get around on foot or by bike or by bus. And so we wanted to be mindful of those and not really be in conflict with those as we develop some of our recommendations. Next slide. Again, the website and storyboard. So really what you see here on these posters or in this presentation, it either already is or will be on this website, plus more, plus accompanying narrative and some other frequently asked questions. So there's much more in there, and as the study wraps, additional documents will be posted in there. So we really encourage you to go in there and check it out. You can point and click and zoom around. It's a little bit interactive. Next slide. So one of the ways that we look at parking is, what is a reasonable parking distance from your destination, right? Depending on your trip, right? If you're coming downtown to have dinner, if you're coming downtown to shop, if you're coming downtown for the, 4th of July fireworks or Harvest Festival, you might be willing to walk different distances for those different types of trips. So we really wanted to look at the downtown, look at where a lot of the destinations were. And if you really think about like 5th and Main is kind of the center of downtown, we started to think about how many spaces are within, say, a 5-minute walk and a 10-minute walk. We have some posters of that, but you can kind of see in the green that right now from the center of town, almost everything is within a 5-minute walk, whether it's the lakefront, town hall, everything along Main Street, and you can get even further out within a 10-minute walk. So as we think about where we're adding additional capacity, we want to be very mindful of that walk shed and how it might shift, and if it's too far to walk or not too far. And we did do some survey questions of this, if any of you remember taking those surveys and catalog that.
What is a walk shed?
A walk shed is how far you can walk from a certain distance. So 5-minute walk from 5th and Main. So we recognize that everybody would love to come right downtown and park right in front of their destination, but of course that's not always going to be possible, but we want to make it reasonable. Next slide. So what did we find in terms of how many parking spaces are in downtown? And I will caveat that definitely when you're counting some of the unpaved areas, they're not nicely marked with white lines and stuff. The counts are a little bit, unprecise, but so this is maybe plus or minus 100, but about 1,550 parking spaces. So these are consisted of public spaces on the street along the curb. They're public spaces in an off-street parking lot operated by the town. They're private parking spaces in a business, behind a business or something like that. And there are also some lots that are owned by the Downtown Development Authority. So there's a mix of spaces. Some of the public spaces are on residential blocks. that don't have any businesses, and other spaces are in commercial blocks that only have commercial businesses. So we wanted to catalog the makeup of these parking spaces to really see, where we're gonna change capacity, where we need to add supply and demand, by category, but also spatially around the town. Next slide. It's a pretty even breakdown too. About half of the parking is on street and half of the parking is off street between the public and private. So we really want to look holistically at your parking system, publicly managed, privately managed, so that it can function as one. Because when you're coming to downtown Windsor, it's really, you're looking for a parking space, not necessarily who owns that parking space, who manages it. You're looking for a parking space, so we gotta look at it holistically. So like David said, we paused the study for a while, but we came back out in September when we felt that things were close enough to normal, and checked with the business owners and stakeholder committee, and we came out and we went out and counted every parked car all over downtown. Maybe some of you saw us out there walking or driving around and off the street, on the street. Yes, we'll take a couple questions, but we do want to wait to the end.
Well, I just need context. Are you talking 1,550 parking spaces in that outline that you?
Yes.
Okay, so all of that area
Yes.
is that number?
With one exception, like if it's your private residential driveway, like for
Okay.
what, we did not count that.
Right.
That is not in play.
I just want context to make sure where all of
Sure.
those were.
Yes, thank you. So we went out from like 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, and we went out on a weekday, a typical weekday, like a Wednesday, and then we went out on a Saturday, not during an event. And again, we recognize that at some times of the day, on some days of the week, currently, certain blocks are full. But overall, again, we have a very big study area. We found that, you were nowhere near close to 1,550 spaces, whether it was, certainly there were busier hours, mid-morning, dinner time, that kind of stuff. Part of the goal of this study is to develop recommendations that really try to better balance the supply that you do have and the demand that you do get. So a lot of our recommendations focus on that, using what you already have better, before we go and build new stuff. Next slide. So then this is just another breakdown where we just wanted to see, well, maybe, there's a higher utilization of on street versus off street. When we looked at that, about 800 spaces for each type of parking, but there really wasn't. It was pretty evenly well under the available. So what we would call like this difference between the 300 and the 700, there were 400 empty parking spaces throughout the day at various blocks, off street, on street, around the downtown area. When we're out here on a non-event, normal fall day, government's open, business open, schools in session, that sort of thing. So there is capacity. It's not exactly where everybody wants it, but there's some capacity. Next slide. And so then this was the weekend, and again, for existing conditions, all day, on street versus off street, we're still seeing several hundred empty parking spaces. Next slide. So what are the variables that drive the demand for more parking in downtown Windsor? Certainly new restaurants opening in Main Street or other shops that, replace vacant or other businesses, that's one. But there's some larger potential generators of future parking demand, and one is the revitalization parcels, also known as the back lots, the gravel lots along the railroad line. They will develop at some point. There is a land use plan for them to have something built there that will demand parking, whatever that use is. The potential entertainment district around the Mill and Tavern, if that were come to fruition, that would drive parking demand. And there are things well outside of downtown that are going to draw people to downtown for parking that we needed to consider. And two of those things is Legends Sports Park, which will have many tournaments, weekends, evenings that could draw people to downtown, and continued subdivisions beyond the town boundaries, out in the county. These people are going to come into downtown. They want to shop, they want to eat, they want to sit by the lakefront. So we had to factor all of that in. It's just not what happens right within downtown, but you're drawing visitors from around the area and potentially around the region. So we did some projections for all of this, and I'll share those in the next couple slides. So before I share the actual projections, we want to talk about what are parking requirements. So as many of you probably know, a lot of jurisdictions, towns, counties, they have codes. They have codes for parking requirements, but those codes vary from place to place. You know, whether it's a church or a restaurant or a library or a school or apartment building could require a certain number of spaces here in Windsor, a different number of spaces in Loveland or Fort Collins. So it's very subjective. So we did put in here what the current code requirement is, and only for downtown. The downtown area has a different parking code requirement than the rest of Windsor. And that was intentional. That was done many years ago to encourage more businesses to come to Main Street. But what we went to was an industry reference manual that we use that actually goes out all over the country to thousands of places, big cities, suburbs, small towns, and counts the observed demand. How many cars are actually parked at different types of land uses on a weekday, on a Saturday, on an evening, depending on how many apartments there are, how many square footage in a restaurant, how many seats in a movie theater, that kind of stuff. So we use this database to develop what is the actual observed parking demand and based our forecast on that. So just to compare them side to side, what is the code now versus what is sort of the reality from this national database. So the town code would require, if residential was built along Main Street or the back lots, it would require right now 1 space for a 1-bedroom and 2 spaces for a 2-bedroom. That's not so bad. The national observed demand is 1.25 spaces per unit in a Main Street kind of area like Windsor. For retail, again, the town code's not too bad. 2 spaces per 1,000. The national observed demand is 2.5, so a little bit under. Restaurant, eating and drinking establishment. This is where you probably can see the challenge is. The town code is only 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. The national database, the observed demand is 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So right away we can see that, becoming an eating and drinking destination is underparking it currently based on this code. So that's a challenge that we're going to try and address. Office, there is some office space. Of course, the town hall is an office. The town hall may expand. About 2.5 spaces is observed demand, and about 2 spaces is in the town code currently. So there is some disconnect there that we'll look through on the regulatory end and the management strategies as we come up with the capacity. So let's talk about the numbers. So again, what we did is we projected both the weekday and the weekend because the demands are different, and we looked 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years into the future to really give the town and the community that blueprint. So the way to read these, and there's a couple posters lying around, but we started at very early in the morning, about 5 in the morning, projected the demand throughout the day to find out for each type of land use when it peaked and when it was very low. And so like residential, as you might imagine, is high in the very early morning, high demand in the very evening, but in the middle of the day, people go out. They go out to work, they go out to shop and stuff. So we layered each land use, housing, restaurant, retail, office, and then we also included visitors from Legend Sports Park that would patronize restaurants, visitors from Legend Sports Park that would patronize retail, shopping, and we did the same thing for new subdivisions out in Weld County that would come in and do the same thing. So we captured everything, and the way to read this is that in what we're saying is in 2 years, if all of these developments, the economy still trends the way it is, up to 700 new parking spaces would be demanded by all of these uses, really kind of a midday peak around lunchtime. Next slide. So if you went to 5 years, and again, the assumed phasing in of these different land uses and development, you'd peak around 11, maybe 1050, 1100 new parking spaces in 5 years on a weekday. And then lastly, we got to 10 years, up to 1,400 again around dinner time on a weekday. That's 10 years from now, you know, if all the economic trends continue. So that's a lot. I mean, we only counted 1,550. So even though we still had some empty spaces, we know we're going to have a deficit. So let's talk about the weekend. So again, right in the next 2 years, you know, you can see here the orange. It's the restaurant. It's the restaurants on the weekend that are demanding a lot of spaces. And so it's about just under 1,000 in 2 years. It's more of a midday peak on the weekend than a dinner time peak. And then 5 years, about 1,300, and then in 10 years, just under 1,800.
So when you say 1,800, are you adding that to the 1,550 existing parking spots?
We'll show you those calculations on the next slide. But one thing I want to point out is what is baked into this calculation is some reasonably dense, I can't say how many stories, but some reasonably dense number of spaces for the backlots. So the demand for the backlots is included in here. And so as we go through the deficit numbers to show you how many spaces we'll need, if the backlots built their own parking to completely meet not town code, but actual demand, all of this would drop. All of this would drop. There still would be a need for more parking, but much less severe if the backlots was able to self-park, is the word we use. So it is included in here. The backlots is 100% included in here, residential backlot. And we'll get to what happens to the current parking on the backlot in a second. Next slide. So parking capacity changes. Just like the demand will not be static because there's, you know, external factors and in-town land use changes, the capacity is not static. So even in the span of our study, Walnut Street changed. They put a bike lane on Walnut Street, and when the angle parking went to parallel, we lost 20 spaces. So that changed from our number. And then if the backlots were to redevelop, and again, I think it was Scott that said there's no signed proposal, no formal proposal right now. There's no developer agreement. It's just a speculation. But those spaces are currently used, even though they're owned by the DDA, they are used by the public to go to the boardwalk, to go to lakefront, to go to dinner. There's about 225, maybe on good days, people really pack it in, closer to 300. But, you know, because it's land use that's programmed to be built on, we drop that capacity out. So again, the demand is built in, the capacity is not, because we don't know, you know, how much parking that new development is going to provide if and when it's built. All we know is that it's going to demand parking, and we're going to recommend that the town change the code to make sure it can at least self-park, if not also provide additional public parking. Next slide. So this is what we did. We took, again, the base demand is this is what we actually counted, this orange line, when we were out in September at the Harvest Fest and other events, regular weekdays. Then the future demand is this gray line. The sum of them is that yellow line. And the blue line is the 1,550. The dashed line is if the backlots were not available because something was built on them. So as you see, in 2 years, again, theoretically, we know there's localized, everybody wants to be on 1 or 2 blocks, but we're looking at a big study area because we believe ultimately people can walk an extra block to get to their destination. But in 2 years, you're still under capacity on a weekday, even if the backlots are gone. Next slide. In 5 years, you're under capacity if the backlots are still there, but if the backlots are gone and they don't provide their own parking, you're over that. You're over capacity, running a deficit. Next slide. In 10 years, again, this is still weekday. In 10 years, whether the backlots are there or not, you're a few hundred spaces over what you have today. Now let's look at the weekend. Again, in 2 years, you're still okay. You're under the capacity. In 5 years, you're over it, whether the backlots are there or not. And in 10 years, you're about 700 spaces shy of what you currently have. But again, remember, we've included the backlot parking demand in there, even though we don't know exactly what might happen And we don't know how much parking they'll provide. Next slide. So this is the summary. So in 2 years, whether you're on the weekday or the weekend day, you have a surplus. You will continue to have a surplus. You got to balance your supply and demand. You will have localized hotspots, and we have tools for managing that, but you will have a surplus. In 5 years, you'll either be at capacity or running a few hundred space deficit. And in 10 years, you'll be running between 350 and 700 spaces. Development could happen faster, it could happen slower. But also, our recommendations could be implemented faster. They don't have to wait for 10 years. And we'll show you some of those timelines. Next slide. So the way we laid out our recommendations is twofold. First, I'm going to talk about capacity recommendations, and then I'm going to talk about management. And they go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other, or you'll just wind up with the same problems you have today. So the way we broke out the capacity is things that are the least expensive for the town to implement, a little bit more expensive, and then the most expensive, with the assumption that the most expensive things would take the most time and could be more years out than later. So we believe in the lowest cost capacity category, you can get 300 spaces back pretty quickly, add to your capacity pretty quickly. So converting some blocks, whether they're commercial or residential, hasn't been determined, but converting some blocks to angled parking that don't have it now will net you another 125. One additional off-street public parking lot at a location to be determined, 150 to 200 more spaces, but within the boundaries of our study area. And then bicycle parking. We definitely recommend bicycle parking. If there's nowhere to park your bike, people aren't going to bike. And a lot of the people coming downtown, they're not coming from Legends or Fort Collins, but they're close enough to bike. So we really do want to see one large bicycle rack or corral can park like 50 bikes, and it's only one car parking space. So it's a really good use of space. Scooter parking, whatever your non-driving mode is. So right there we could get 300. And I'll tell you where these things are in a second. Let's go to the medium cost. So this is another 350. And you'll see as we add all this up, we're gonna be way over 700 spaces that we forecasted you need, because we just want to make sure in case one thing falls through that you still have enough to get well over the deficit. Shared parking is a term, I guess the easiest way to explain it is like if there's a bank and the bank is only open during banking hours, but there's a sign that says evenings and weekend, this is available to the public. You're coming downtown to do something else, park in this lot. So we believe in the 200 to 600 blocks of Main Street on the south side, that many of those very small parking lots could be improved, meaning paved, striped, signed, lit, so that people would feel comfortable if they're going to a restaurant and parking there. Yes, some of it sort of happens informally now in a couple of those places, but we really want to formalize it and make it available to the public, and people know to go right there, and that would be 200 spaces. And then we also feel pretty confident in looking at all of the parcels throughout the study area, that in a medium cost, maybe a little bit more to buy the land, but in a medium cost, you could even get another interim surface lot or a few more angled parking spaces, another 150, that's 350. And then let's go to the long term, parking garage. So we have at least one location we're sharing tonight where you could build a parking garage up to 3 levels, up to 375 spaces, including electric vehicle charging spaces. We're also recommending satellite parking. So this is to stop people before they get into town and clog up Main Street and drive around the block. Chimney Park, the high and middle school campus have a shuttle. This is very common. Colorado Springs, other towns, on Thursdays through Sundays, the highest demand when there's events, when there's dining, employee parking, get people that work in the restaurants, the businesses, get them to park out there, free up those spaces. You could implement technology if anybody's been down to Golden and ridden that driverless shuttle, like something like that. So that could be another 500 spaces leased. that, you know, for larger events, larger days, you could get those people out of downtown. So that's 800. Next slide. So let's talk about where. So again, two locations we're sharing exactly tonight are the shared parking locations, which are the 200 to 600 blocks of Main Street on the south side and behind Town Hall, between Town Hall and Main Park. We have identified other parcels that some are privately owned, some are publicly owned by other governmental agencies beside the town that have been in discussions, but unfortunately we can't reveal tonight exactly where they are. But there are discussions ongoing about potential purchase and conversion to some type of parking. But they are largely within the study area. And so I can tell you in the northwest quadrant, which is again 5th and Main, or like the alley just south of Main, that area. So the northwest, we're very confident that the town could move forward with a parcel or two for 100 spaces, surface lot. In the southwest quadrant, again, about 200 spaces, and that's primarily the shared parking locations. In the southeast quadrant, 400 spaces. We're very confident, with 325 of those spaces potentially being the parking garage behind Town Hall. And in the northeast quadrant, we're very confident that 1 to 2 surface lots in 200 spaces or 1 parking garage could be located there if negotiations can be successful. So we've got lots of chips on the table, and this is sort of the locational. But the one I want to go one more slide. I think we have. Okay, that's a poster. So again, the green lines are potential additional angle parking. The yellow is the surface lot or the parking garage. The orange is the shared parking, the improvement of the private parking lots for more public use. And the red circles are the bike parking, so about 4 corrals throughout the downtown. Next slide. So we wanted to look a little bit more at what a parking structure might look like behind Town Hall. This is really like 0.1% design. There's a lot of engineering that needs to go into this. But that's Town Hall there. This is kind of an artist rendering of what it would look like, some of the architecture facade elements, streetscaping, lighting, and there's a kind of bird's eye view there as well. So this is how far we've advanced sort of a possible parking structure. Now remember, this is a long-term thing or a high-cost thing. It can be built faster, but it's not something that can be built as quickly as just a surface parking lot. So let's talk then about management strategies. Next slide. Oh, so sorry. So if the parking garage were here, where that star is, there's still a tremendous amount of Main Street and downtown and almost to the lakefront that's still within a 5-minute walk. There's some of Main Street on the western end that's maybe closer to 7 or 10 minutes. But this is a pretty good location for accessibility and walking for a larger parking facility. Again, we have that. I think that poster's in the back. So management strategies. So you can't just build your way out of it. You've got to manage it, balance that supply versus demand. So in terms of parking regulations, looking at temporary or permanent resident parking restrictions on some of the blocks closest to the restaurants by the Mill and Hearth and other of those, and probably only evenings and weekends. And then possibly metered parking on Main Street, because we want to encourage people, if they want a premium space, if they want to come to town and go to dinner, and we want to they should pay for that premium space. If they want to park for free, they can go a block further, or maybe they can go into an off-street lot that will be built, but also that it's available. So if the town prices it, they can put it at a price. There'll always be a couple spaces available right in front of your business. But if you really don't feel like walking, you can pay and park right there. That would come with education and enforcement. As everybody knows, there's no permit parking regulations. There's no metered parking right now in Windsor, so it would be incumbent on the town to educate and enforce that. They're not in a hurry to pay for a garage to give you tickets and tickets and tickets. This would be a very gradual enforcement. There'd be lots of notices, then there might be warnings, then there might be very small fines, and only after a period of time would there be, what I call normal parking enforcement. But this is, these are two strategies to better manage the spaces that you have on the street and where people are parking on the street. Other management, the shuttles. So if you did do some satellite lots, whether they're for employees or event attendees, running a small shuttle, and that's the picture of one down from Colorado Springs, but you could also do some curbside, shared valet, attendant assisted lots so that people are coming for dinner, they don't want to look for parking, just hand your keys over, have a complimentary lane, it's multiple restaurants working together on a piece of the curb, they go park your car. You just go in and dine or have a drink and enjoy yourself. And a parking benefits district. So if the town begins to collect revenue for parking spaces, the revenue goes right back into the town. Whether it's for streetscape improvements or paying for the shuttles so that people can ride for free very quickly from a satellite lot, and then the whole code angle. So revising the parking code requirements to match the reality of the demand and the need is really important, especially when it comes to the backlots and establishing a fee in lieu. So even if it's the backlots are just another commercial establishment, that if they, even under the current town code, if they say required 20 spaces for a new restaurant, but they could only fit 5 or 7, they pay the town to build those 15 spaces somewhere else but in the downtown area, so that they can get credit for providing more parking than they need, or they could buy additional parking off-site. But either way, these mechanisms make sure that the parking that is provided meets the actual demand. Next slide. So again, we have met with the parking committee. We've been working for 4 months now. We've had 3 meetings. We're gonna have another meeting, and it's made up of residents, business owners, and institution. Many of them in the room tonight. Thank them again for all their time. They've given really great input. And they have some slightly different suggestions than we have right now. And in full transparency, we want to share them with you because the study's not finalized. So the parking committee wants to limit the parking for commercial establishments on residential blocks. They don't want more angled parking on residential blocks. They feel it should only be on commercial blocks. Right now, we're recommending it on both. They don't agree with that. They would like to see, because there's no development in place, signed agreement, construction ready to go, shovel ready to go, they would like to see the DDA lots improved like the other shared parking we recommended, paving, marking, maybe lighting, to absolutely maximize and make those available to the public as long as there's no building on that site yet. That's their recommendation. And lastly, they would like to see a public parking garage on the back lots because it's as close to Main Street as you can get. And whether that parking garage is part of a backlot development for the public above and beyond the development itself, or just a standalone parking garage, they want to see a garage located there. We've proposed a garage on the town-owned piece of land right behind town hall. So these are the recommendations. We'll be meeting again, trying to find some common ground and formulate the final study recommendations. So what will happen after tonight's meeting is we'll take a few weeks. We'll take all your notes from tonight, your comment cards, which you send us an email and on the website. We'll meet again with the committee, and then at some point, there will be a final recommendation report that will get adopted by the town. And when it's adopted, that means these are the tools, the strategies, the money they'll put behind to implement either the management strategies or the capacity improvements and be ready when the land use changes and some development comes. So I think that was the last slide. Oh, sorry, cost and implementation. So we really are giving in this study a roadmap on who is the responsible actor for each strategy, whether it's a management strategy or a capacity strategy, roughly the cost. Obviously, it's cheaper to build a surface parking lot per space than a structured parking lot. and where the funding might come from. Grants are in the mix. There's a lot of federal money flowing right now, all the way down to states and towns and counties, especially for things like, the shuttles that we talked about, and the timeline. So again, remember, we said lowest cost, medium cost, highest cost. We said 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Right now, we've been as aggressive as we can, and the town is on board with this in everything being 2 to 4 years, maybe 5 years. So we're trying to move everything forward, develop a roadmap to move as much forward as we can, because we know the development could come faster. But like we said, there's no proposal right now for the backlot, so there's no shovel turning, no town vote or anything like that. But it is something the town has been planning for. So, and some of these are a joint implementation by the town and the DDA, and some are just things the town can do on their own. So I think that was the last slide, and with that, we could take some group Q&A for a few minutes, and I think we do want to break back up to the boards. So
Go ahead in the back.
Can you tell me if you did any parking counts while the lake was open? Or did you just do it over the last few months?
No, so we did both counts like over Harvest Festival and during, the August and September time frame. So they were fully open
So not
and
really
present.
midsummer,
So-
when the lake is open and people are hauling their children and having things to the lake to go to the beach.
So we definitely were out there on Labor Day weekend when the beach and people were boating, and even beyond us physically being here, walking the blocks and counting cars, we use many days of historical aerial imagery going back to 2016 to make sure we saw the trends all seasons of the year. So I think we have some of that data on the website. You can see 2019, 2018, some additional utilization. Yes, ma'am.
Moving back to the residential parking permits for a minute, you're not talking about what Fort Collins has done with the stadium, right, where they out the residents when there's an event? Okay, just parking.
No.
Is the opposite, is to protect the residents.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any plans for how all these people are gonna cross that busy state highway to get to the lake?
So that issue has come up actually at every meeting we've had about some kind of flashing light or median to get across Main Street. And again, this is really a parking study, not a traffic study. So we're gonna work with CDOT on that recommendation. And again, it's their road. So even if the town wanted to do it tomorrow, they couldn't. They have to get the state's permission. We think it's a good idea. We think you might have to restrict a left turn or something to do it, but because it's a state road, because it's the only road that carries truck traffic, all the way across I-25 points east, CDOT's not, here today to do it, but I think they're hearing a lot about it, and I'm sure they'll be open to it. Yes, sir.
No, I don't understand it, cause over here on 257, like the light flashing there, one out south of town, those are state highways, why it's such a big deal of getting it.
Well, we're talking about a light really just for pedestrians.
I understand.
Yeah.
I walked there, and I stood and counted 20 cars go by me before they even think about stopping.
Yeah. The one on 257 is just pedestrians and bikes, so that's
Right.
it.
That's why they have
Yeah.
a crossing guard by McDonald's, it's because people won't stop.
So we're talking about something like the light by the middle school that when it starts.
Yep.
We agree. We think it belongs downtown. But again, this study is for the town. The town doesn't own the road. We're gonna pass this on to CDOT. We encourage you to contact CDOT directly as well. It's just the nature of the transportation system. It's a state road. Yes, yes, sir.
So to build on that, is there any talks about that expanding to a 4-lane down through downtown? And if that was the case, that would eliminate some of that parking, I would assume.
So the state can do whatever they want, but the town is adamantly opposed to that. It would destroy the character and take away the parking, and I think the state would be able to bypass before they would ever do that. I don't work for the state and I can't speak for them, but we worked with a lot of state DOTs. I'm pretty confident. Yes, ma'am.
I don't understand about the parking. You can park downtown, but you can't back out because there are no traffic signals. 4 years ago, I was told that it's up to the town to put them in. CDOT doesn't care. I was told by a man that talked to CDOT. and there's nothing to regulate the traffic all along Main Street. So a lot of people don't go downtown anymore.
Are you talking about reverse and angled parking or the flashing light?
Just current, a regular traffic signal, a stoplight.
Mm.
There's nothing to regulate the traffic, so you can back out or cross the street. And a pedestrian crosswalk is definitely needed by the Lake House Coffee. People cannot cross the street.
So what,
It's
we completely understand. What would be really important is if you put that in writing so that when we pass it on to CDOT, it's not our recommendation, it's the town residents
Or
that,
a petition.
however you guys choose. Yeah, we have not engaged CDOT in this parking study very much because it is a parking study, not a traffic study.
Almost exactly 3 years ago, there was a similar meeting here with representatives from CDOT. And they particularly said to me that they are willing to work with the town on these various issues, too much traffic, and not being able to cross Main Street safely. But for at least the last 25 years, and probably much longer than that, the town has always fallen back on that same mantra, we can't do anything, it's CDOT. And really, it's not CDOT, they're willing to work with the town.
And town taxpayers did buy the backlots piece. I mean, that was bought with taxpayers' money, with the idea that you'd have parking for the lake.
We understand,
Suddenly became not taxpayers' property.
we understand some of this history, you know, all we can do is address it moving forward.
So,
Yes, sir.
with the committee recommending that the backlots be used for parking, a good spot for parking garage, why didn't you entertain that and present that as a possibility? It seems like they've got access to 7th Street, a light, it's just an excellent spot for parking. The community hates the idea of the density going in there with no plan, where they're gonna park, 1.25 spaces. It's just gonna create such a quagmire.
So again, the recommendations, they're not,
Do you see
yeah.
you add that to your presentation, instead of putting a parking garage behind City Hall, by the park and in the residential area, put it across right behind the commercial, makes so much more sense. So, I think there'd be a lot of people that say, we wanna see that as an option.
So again, the recommendations are not finalized, but understand that we reacted to a land use plan that was already in place when this study started. We envision an ultimate solution where there is most likely through code some public parking available in the backlots in addition to other public off-street. It's not really one or the other. Again, because negotiations aren't finished with public and private property owners, we don't have a specific proposal to codify or react to on the backlots. What we're just saying is, you know, right now, our recommendation is a parking garage there. The committee's recommendation is this. We're gonna continue talking. You know, it's probably gonna be some kind of common ground where we'll work through code requirements and some other location.
I'm a little confused that you're doing this study for the betterment of all the people in Windsor, but it seems like someone's told you that the backlots are off limit for parking.
That's not exactly what the study is saying. The study is clearly recommending the backlots self-park, whatever comes in there.
No, we're not the backlot development, self-parking, we're saying the backlot should be retained for public parking and developed for public parking, whether it's the garage or paved and lined, and see how that goes, but to create more density downtown and people already can't get out, seems just irresponsible.
Well, part of that is,
It's obvious, the city owns those lots. Why not use them to help?
sure, and so part of that is in response to, again, we've had previous public hearings like last fall when we had another open house similar to this, although not as well attended. You know, part of those recommendations were from other board members and things like that to say, hey, we've got some development ideas and opportunities for those backlots, so let's not show future parking on there because we think there's gonna be development on there fairly soon. So again, Those were earlier draft recommendations that came, and this is just in response to those previous comments. It's really no different than what we're doing here tonight, and part of the reason why we're putting those steering committee recommendations on here is because we're gonna take your comments and their comments, and we're gonna continue to work and refine with them as a stakeholder committee and with the DDA and town staff and our consultants and come to those final recommendations. So these are not set in stone.
I have another related question regarding, the diagonal parking in the residential area. How many spaces going back, on the south side of town did you figure in? How in front of residential areas, diagonal spaces?
I mean, overall, within the entire study area, it was about 125 additional spaces through angle parking, but I don't have a breakdown yet on residential blocks versus south side versus commercial blocks.
So there is no idea on how to get those people out of the residential communities onto Main Street, whether they go right or left. And so we're looking maybe after an event, having traffic backed up and not be able to leave our homes because we can't get out. I mean, that's so much traffic all at once. Has there been a thought about, how to get that traffic in and out of our residential area?
Signage to current and future parking is another effort that the DDA is undertaking. And, we can share some of those findings, when a plan for that is ready, but we don't want people circling the block for parking, and we understand that events put a tremendous strain on traffic congestion in the road network, and again, this is a parking study. If there's a separate traffic study through CDOT or somewhere else to address those concerns, that's definitely viable, but this is really about parking supply, capacity, and management. Anybody else that hasn't asked a question? Yes.
I have a couple. So who does own the back lots? Is it the city or is it privately owned?
It's a downtown development authority and kind of town partnership, but it's largely the DDA's.
As well as, does that mean the DDA is basically the city, is that right, or?
They're separate entities,
Oh, okay.
they're separate authorities.
It's a
if you will,
government owned?
But it's still a government.
And then you mentioned, the land use recommendations, I believe you said, or something like that, for the back lots, but, what is it? What are the recommendations currently?
I mean, there's not recommendations, there's assumptions. There's
Oh,
been
okay.
various proposals
All right.
over the years for those backlots,
Mhm.
but we put in assumptions, I think about 200 residential units and maybe about 50,000 square feet of shopping or restaurant.
So apartments or condos or something and restaurants and that type of thing back in there? Hmm.
It's an assumption. If it turns out that ultimately the town doesn't approve that much, we'll need as much parking. So I think we'll take 3 more questions, and we do want to respect time. We'll continue to hang out at the boards. Sir?
When you were doing your assumptions on the back lots, were you doing the assumptions on 2 or 3 story buildings? Because now the town wants to raise the height limitations up to 65 feet, which would be many more apartments.
So we the height didn't factor into the program because we didn't know how big a dwelling unit could be, or how they would lay out their site plan. I mean, the height is really a separate zoning issue. We just assumed a program to see how much parking might be needed from that land use, whether it's 3 stories, 4 stories. We just don't know. It really is a separate process. Yes, ma'am?
Hey, concerns parking garage ideas. 2 questions. The one is that we're gonna possibly be by town. Is that underground, 2 layers and rooftops that you're looking at?
It's a ground level plus 1 deck plus possibly a second deck. But it would not be taller than town hall.
And that's based on code? That
No,
the 3 level, you just threw that in as a.
correct. So we're trying to either plan just for an additional surface lot or maybe a 1-story to start with, because we really want to maintain sensitivity of the residential character as well as the park, because that's a great community center. And so we wanted to be really careful and sensitive, as well as, the park there, the access, all that sort of thing. but it's not directed by code.
And then my other question on downtown parking, over by the lake, has the town considered, I know right now it's historical land, but you know that building that the town bought over 10 years ago, that Bitch Rider House? And that's 2 lots there, there's the house and then the lot right behind it. Why not convert that for the benefit of the town into a parking garage? Like to help with events and things that are going down. And plus during other events that are on Main Street, that's real close proximity right there too. It's only a block away. Has that ever been thought of or considered getting up that piece of land? It's not being used, it's getting trashed.
Sure.
It's horrible.
We have not looked at tearing down that historical house as part of a recommendation, but we can definitely take a look at that and discuss. So,
You could move that house possibly, don't tear it down.
yeah.
Can you write that comment down
Yeah.
on the comment card, please, and leave it in the back? So we get the exact block you're talking about?
Last question. Yes, sir.
I guess my question is, it sounds like there's been some idea with the backlot development of an estimate of what parking needs are gonna be based kind of on a guess of what's gonna be there, right? But if it's all restaurant or all single unit or like multi-unit, like that's gonna be very different needs, right? Okay, so how are we going to, and it's, I mean, one of them was like 10 parking spots per 1,000 square feet of restaurant versus 1.25 for residential. I mean, we could be off by a factor of 10-ish prospectively, depending on what gets
You would never build that big of a restaurant, so you won't ever be that far off, you know, because at most you'll switch over to an office, and that's 2 spaces per 1,000. So your factors are gonna vary very
so
much.
it'll only be a factor of 5.
Or half, you know, because you're going from maybe 1.25, you know, spaces per dwelling unit to 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Like you're really similar in what you're doing, because a lot of, you know, traditional multifamily units are in that probably 800 to maybe 1,200 square feet, and so that translates fairly closely to that 1,000 square foot office requirement.
Sure, but like the people that I've spoken with that wanna do something downtown, wanna put a rooftop bar up or additional restaurant space, which is all what's coming down on Main Street, right? Like, we've got 3 new restaurants opening. So I'm thinking that it's gonna be more likely that it's gonna be additional restaurant space than, like, we're not putting a Target in the back lots, right?
Although that would be great.
But I mean, the point is still that we're kind of guessing on what we think might happen without having any idea what's gonna happen.
Right, and so that's where, if and when we do get that final proposal in, the town has all the leverage in the world to work with that developer and say, hey, whatever comes in, residential, retail, restaurant, office, whatever it is, that we can stipulate that if you develop this, great, you need to park 1-to-1, whatever that ratio ends up being for whatever type of use is proposed.
Yeah, I think everyone's in agreement that the current town code for parking won't work for the backlots. And also the backlots will be required to do a traffic study, which will answer some of your traffic questions, when they come in with the formal proposal. I think we do wanna go to the boards and we'll hang out for a little while, but
We don't get a chance to get together and ask questions, and so I move that you extend the question and answer period. How many more people wanna ask a question? Raise your hand. Is that it? Come on.
I was gonna say, I don't know if that much.
I've seen a lot of people that wanna have some input, and we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're happy to stay here as long as you guys wanna chat, so we're happy to answer your questions. So, again, we appreciate everybody's time. Again, there's boards, we're here, lots of staff, food, and your comment cards are greatly appreciated. So thank you very much all.
thank you.